I'll give you a very specific example from this week. In 2006, I taught a seminar at Harvard called Zionist Diplomacy from Herzl to Oslo. And I presented the students in the seminar with a collection of documents that began with the Balfour Declaration of November 1917 and ended with the exchange of letters between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat from September of 1993. And what I tried to show the students, I think in the end they agreed with me, even though it had nothing to do with them wanting a good grade, of course. But I was able to persuade them that in the Balfour Declaration, the greatest empire on earth at the time, the British Empire, recognizes that A, there is a Jewish people, that the Jewish people have an inalienable right to establish a homeland in their ancient land, the land of Israel. And that promise represented the high watermark for Zionist diplomacy. The 1947 partition resolution from the UN that created the State of Israel recognized the creation of a Jewish state and an independent Arab state, but didn't talk about the Jewish people and its rights. Rabin recognizes the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Rabin recognized the Palestinian people. Yasser Arafat recognized Israel. And I remember reading this back in 1993 and thinking, there's a mistake here. That without recognition of a Jewish people and its right to have a legitimate permanent state in what it regards as its ancient homeland, there will be no peace. And it is not accidentally that 7 years later, at the second Camp David talks between Israel, the Palestinians, and the United States, that Yasser Arafat came to then President Clinton and said, what are you talking about, Jewish people? There's no such thing as a Jewish people. There was never a temple on the Temple Mount. This whole thing is imaginary. And that claim was almost grounded in the Oslo Accords. He was operating within the context of the Arab Accords. There's an Israel, but it's not a Jewish state. It doesn't belong to the Jewish people and has no legitimacy. So we can move 6 to 8 million Palestinian refugees back to that state. It'll still be called Israel, but the majority of the population will be Palestinian. And so when Prime Minister Netanyahu calls for recognition of Israel as the Jewish state, as the national home of the Jewish people on the part of the politician, as a condition for peace, it's not a tactical move. It's utterly substantive. There is no more substantive demand than that. Without that, there can be no peace. We are ready to recognize the existence of a Palestinian people. We're willing to recognize the existence of a Palestinian people that belongs here, that's not alien to this place. A Palestinian people that has a right to self-determination. We are simply asking that all of those recognitions, if you will, be reciprocal. Without that, there won't be peace. All other issues, borders, settlements, all of those are secondary to the issue of reciprocal recognition and legitimacy. And that position I came to many years before I got this position. And through my understanding of history and my realization that we have to get back to that wonderful moment in November 1917 when our right as a people to this land was recognized by the greatest empire on earth and then endorsed by the precursor to the United Nations, by the League of Nations. So it's a right that is recognized by the international community.
Michael, you and I both came on Aliyah about the same time in the 70s and moved here. I remember you from being a spokesman in the civil administration. I've also seen you at Jacob's Ladder song festivals. How will it be for you to be Israeli ambassador in the United States?
Well, this is not a new thought for me. I grew up in the Zionist youth movement in the United States, and we used to have our annual convention in Washington. And I'll never forget when I was 16 years old, they took us to Washington, and the height of this Washington convention was Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, when they brought in the Israeli ambassador to the United States, and his name was Yitzhak Rabin, and we went crazy. It was probably the height of my adolescence, was seeing Yitzhak Rabin, and I thought to myself back then, that is what I'd love to do. So this is the realization of a dream that goes back many, many years, really to my childhood. And I have spent almost my entire adulthood in this country. Over 30 years now I've been here, and have had the full Israeli experience of being in the army, being in the regular army, working for the foreign ministry, the defense ministry, the prime minister's office. I've worked with Rabin, done it all. I've had 2 kids in the army now, another 3rd kid going into the army the Israeli experience. At the same time, very close relationship with the United States. My family is there, my parents, 2 sisters. I have continued to teach at American universities. This year I was on sabbatical at Georgetown. And I really feel that I'm a person who has one foot in each world. One of the more difficult stages in this process of becoming his ambassador was that I had to give up my American citizenship. Very difficult emotionally, very difficult, really difficult emotionally. But if you sign a piece of paper, it can't make me any less American. It's not going to make me less of a Yankee fan or make me less of a bluegrass fan. They can't take that away from me. And I think that the fact that I've had this foot in both worlds for now over 3 decades will assist me in what I view as my cardinal goal of keeping channels open and making Israel understandable to Americans and America understandable to Israelis.